This Week in Startups is brought to you by Texture. Get unlimited access to all your favorite magazines in a single app. Start your free trial at texture.com/twist. Twist listeners will continue to get Texture for just $9.99 a month, over 30% off. And Squarespace. Start building your website today at squarespace.com. Enter offer code TWIST at checkout to get 10% off.
Good afternoon, everybody. That was a pretty interesting talk. And now for something completely different. So those of you who know me from reading my blog will know that I'm completely obsessed with funnels. And so this afternoon, what I want to talk to you about is a way of thinking that I've found to be incredibly helpful. And to give you an example of what it meant to me, when I was doing my first startup quite a long time ago in my life, I had a 9-month sales cycle for a product that cost $50,000, and it was bugging the hell out of me. So I started trying to think about how I could fix it, and I ended up being successful in cutting that 9-month sales cycle down to 1 day. I have to say, I've never pulled off that same level of success, but I have pulled off smaller successes using the same technique that actually end up having a huge impact on companies. So that's what I'm going to share with you today, and hopefully you'll find it interesting. So let me start at the real basic level here, which is, why do we need a sales process? What's the entire reason for this to exist? Let me pose a theoretical question for you. Imagine your company puts up a website that has a very simple message like this on it in the description, and your product sells for $9,999, and you put a Buy It Now button there. And now ask yourself the question, are your buyers going to click that Buy It Now button right away after hitting that website? The answer is no, right? But the question that's worth thinking about is, why is it no? What stands between them from the moment of first learning about your product to feeling confident enough that they will actually press that button? And so what we end up doing is we realize that there's a bunch of questions that the buyer has that they have to get resolved. Probably one of the most important ones is, does this product actually work? Does it work the way I can use it? But there are other questions as well. And they may also have a buying process, the way their company wants them to go about justifying things and raising cash to pay for something. And so what we typically do as growth folks is we create a series of steps to try to break this process down and make it easy for them to get these questions answered here. So you might introduce a free trial as a good example of something to help them get to know if the product actually works. So what happens here is that not everybody coming into the first step that arrives at your website will do the free trial that will then close. So we end up getting a funnel-shaped drop-off in people coming into this. And I've spent basically the last many, many, many years of my life absolutely having the best fun possible, studying every funnel I can get my hands on. And what I found is something fascinating, which is that every funnel has a blockage point. It doesn't matter if you're Microsoft or Cisco or Google or whatever. There's something that's not working as well as you'd like in your sales process. And there's something that I found that's common to most of them, and that is that we were designed by a vendor thinking about how they wanted things to work. And that created a problem because fundamentally, we who were designing those things were asking the customer to do something that they weren't motivated to do. So we designed it around what we wanted to happen, not what they were interested in having happen. So what I want to talk to you about today is a whole way of thinking which is buyer-centric, where you stop thinking like a vendor when you design your funnel, and you take the exercise of putting yourself in your customer's head throughout the entire experience of working through your funnel. So let me start with a little story to kind of help illustrate some of this. Imagine you have turned up at a station accidentally 45 minutes early to meet your partner, and you're now wondering, what can I do with this 45 minutes? So you walk into a clothing store or some other store, and the first thing that happens to you is that a salesperson comes up to you pretty quickly, and they say, "Can I help you?" And you say, "Well, actually, I'm just browsing, thank you very much." But this is a persistent salesperson who's kind of interested in making something happen. So they don't leave you alone. They keep coming back to you, and they're kind of trying to find something that they can get you interested in. Can you raise your hand if you feel excited about that salesperson? Can you raise your hand if you don't like that salesperson in your lives? So the majority of you don't like that salesperson. Here's a second story for you. You are going to a black tie wedding. You're a male in this particular case. You don't have a black tie, so you've got a problem on your hands. You rush into a store. You have very little time. You go into Nordstrom's, and you're looking around like crazy. You cannot find the damn black ties. Now you look around to see, where's a salesperson? You don't find a salesperson either. So what the hell happened there? Why do we want a salesperson in the first situation, but not in the second? The answer lies in this buyer's journey, which I think many of you have now become familiar with, which is where, this is a very simplistic view of it, the buyer goes through 3 stages here: awareness, consideration, and purchase. In the first situation, why we didn't want a salesperson is that we were in the awareness stage. We hadn't decided we really wanted to buy anything at all. We were just kind of wandering around the place. But in the second case, we were right down the far end. We knew we needed to purchase something, and that's when it's really important to be able to get the answers to your questions there. So what I see happening all the time is that we hire salespeople, and these people feel like they need to be selling, so they make the incredible mistake of handling every lead as though it was right down at the far end of the purchase funnel, when the reality, in my view, this is just a rough estimation, I'm sure you can do your own estimation, is that I think about 80% of the traffic coming to your website is still in the awareness phase, and the worst thing you can do is start being that salesperson who's pestering them. And only about 5% are ready to actually purchase something from you. So we need to change the dialogue here and have really a different dialogue for each different stage here. So you have to think about content that's appropriate for people at the awareness stage and a way of nurturing them as they go through this process here. So if you're in the awareness stage, you really want to be thinking about how to generate awareness for your product and for the pain that it solves, and get them thinking about this pain and the fact that it could be solved. Perhaps talk about how people are solving it and what kind of benefits they're seeing when they have solved it. But here's my top piece of advice for you. If I got on this stage and all I said to you was matrix partners, matrix partners, matrix partners, you would hate me, because I'd be selling a product to you, and the last thing you want to hear is somebody who comes on the stage and sells a product. But if I got up here, and instead of doing that, I'm pitching you something that's educational and helpful to you, that's okay. That's an acceptable form of interaction with you. So this is what one wants to do, in my opinion, is don't sell at all during that phase of the interaction. Keep that for later on. So also, there's something important to recognize about this cycle here, which is there are triggers that cause people to move from just being vaguely interested in something to really needing it and actually going into a process where they are actually going to purchase the thing. And so these triggers are really important. If I asked each of you in the audience here to think about your specific product, what do you think is the trigger that causes your buyer to actually go from being passively kind of vaguely interested in this area to actually actively wanting to buy? And this is an important question to know the answers to, because many times you can't create the trigger, but I'm going to show you a couple of situations where you can create it. But if you identify what the trigger looks like, you now have a very targeted way of finding those people and talking a language to them that's very directly reaches them. So examples of triggers here would be you're starting a new software project, you need a completely new framework or a new set of development tools. Those are kind of classic things. Or you just lost your data in a hard drive crash, suddenly you're very interested in backup software, whereas before you lose your data, the last thing you care about is backup software. So let's talk about buyer persona. These are things that I think have been very widely discussed. I think they're extremely important to help you understand how to start designing your funnel. I'm going to throw up a slide here that I don't really want you to worry about trying to read in detail, just maybe use it as something to look at after this event here, because there are tons of questions on here. My definition of a buyer persona seems to be a bit different to what I find elsewhere on the web, so you might find these questions helpful. They're really all about getting to the heart of what motivates this person, what creates these triggers, what are they going to like about your product, what are they going to not like about your product, who do they find as an influencer, and where are you going to find them, and what kinds of messages will work with them. So once you have that, my next recommendation is that instead of drawing this sales process that you've been to a conference and you heard that company X was using successfully and saying, let's use that process, start differently. Start with that buyer, assemble a few friendly buyers that are willing to talk to you, and find out what kind of a buying process they're likely to go through. And write those steps down. And then once you have those steps, now take a look at how you thought your process was going to work and change the way you work a little bit here. Try to get inside of their brain and think about how they're thinking as they're going through their different steps there. And the more you're good at getting inside of their brain, the better you are going to be at this whole exercise here. And similarly, When they start interacting with your website and with your free trial, you want to become an expert at getting inside of your brain and understanding how they're going to perceive what you're asking them to do there. So we may do things like looking and recognizing that they won't just look at one vendor. They're going to shortlist other vendors here. So maybe we can help out that process by creating a competitive matrix for them and showing them who the competitors are and why we think we're better. If they have to do an ROI for their boss, we found that most buyers do a very poor job of creating those ROIs. So maybe we can actually take that step on for them, get them to give us a bit of data, create a calculator, and then spit out a nice PowerPoint that they can use to help out with that process there. And then you should look at things like concerns that they have to address. So maybe they're worried about security. And if that's the case, then a thought that you might have here is maybe I can get a third party that's well recognized to do a security audit for me and create a white paper that they can download to answer that question for them. Maybe they're going to worrying about buying from a small company. So perhaps we could do something like going and signing up a channel that they think is very safe to actually sell to them. So you get around that. If you're selling a high-ticket item, this has been very effective for some of my portfolio companies. If it's a smaller ticket item, you can do things like a lot of customer stories to solve that problem. But in essence, what we're talking about here is a way to look at these funnel steps that your buyer is going through and getting inside your customer's head. And I'm going to help you with a diagram here that I found to really be useful for this. If you have a broken step, I like to literally write it down to you because it's amazing how the process of writing it down creates the solutions for you. What is the friction in the step? What work am I asking them to do and how hard is that work? What concerns are going to be inside of their mind? And now I have to either redesign the step to get rid of those, or if I can't redesign it, like I need their email address, I just can't get away without getting that information, what can I use in the way of a motivation that's actually bigger and stronger than the concerns and the friction to actually drag them through that step there? And let me give you an example of what we're talking about here with this motivation. So here's a situation that I think everybody struggles with. How do I get traffic to come to my website? It's hard as hell to get people to pay attention to you. So this is an example that I think most of you probably know well. HubSpot, they created this thing called the Website Grader. And now you'll notice something important on this thing, which is a 95 in big letters there. That's the score that my website got. Nobody normally going into this process gets that. I'd already run their software to fix my website up. Most people get a score of 55 or 60 if they're lucky. And that's pretty cool because what happens when you, as a very well-trained student out of the American classroom system, gets a low grade? It's a trigger, right? You're not going to be happy with your boss finding out that you've got a crummy website that scored poorly on this front. So this is one of the situations where it shows you that you can actually create a trigger to get somebody to get into a buying process by showing them that they're really not where they need to be. There's some other cool things about this. Because it's a free tool, it drove a lot of viral spread. It was very simple for the customer, low work required, high value delivered. And then it delivered another value, which was it built trust with the customer because it was such a well-done report that it was obvious these guys were experts. So that once you had that trigger, you want to ask them the question, well, how could you help me fix this problem? And then the last lesson that I think is really important here is this is a great example of how the product team can help do something that is typically thought of as a marketing task. And I'm going to come back to how important this is, because I think this is one of the things that's broken in a lot of growth teams at this point, is they're not using the product team for marketing purposes.
Hey everybody, let me take a moment to tell you about Texture. Yes, Texture, and it is an awesome new service that gets you magazines right to your devices. And magazines are great for writing and beautiful photography to tell stories better, expand your knowledge, and entertain you. Of course, National Geographic takes you further away. The Atlantic gets you to the heart of the issue. And People magazine helps you relax, while Wired and Vogue let you see the future. But quality of magazine should be available anytime without needing to carry them around or have them clutter up your home. And the answer to that conundrum is Texture. Texture is an app that delivers unlimited access to over 200 premium magazines right now. And you can try Texture for free. Imagine having all your favorite magazines and the back issues anytime, anywhere. So here's your call to action. You're going to want to go try texture.com/twist. Texture.com/twist. And if you choose to continue, my podcast listeners get Texture for just $9.99 a month. That's 30% off the listed price. Go to texture.com/twist and you can start your free trial today. Once again, Texture, texture.com/twist. It's an amazing product. It's gorgeous. And you really get to get in those back issues and see what's been going on in the world and get that high quality design, photography, and writing all together in one app. It is a must. Go check out texture.com/twist. Okay, let's get back to this amazing program.
So really quickly, I won't spend tons of time on this slide, but I do think one of the most important things that people are changing in the way they work these days, they're recognizing that the buyer loves to not interact with the salesperson and would like, if possible, to do this selling themselves. And if that's the case, you have to give them free trials or freemium versions of the product. And when you do that, it's a very powerful thing, but you need to recognize something important happened there, which is the product has now become your salesperson. And if that's the case, we need to understand what we call the time to wow. And I have to thank Gail Goodman, who's the CEO of Constant Contact, who brought this up in the HubSpot board meetings the first time I heard it, so credit to her. So let me define wow for you. I think of two wows. There's a mini wow, which is when somebody's going through your free trial and they see something that's cool and exciting. It kind of motivates them to keep going and they're enjoying themselves, they're having a bit of fun. But the big wow, the one that really matters here, is when did you prove to them that there's enough clarity that your product will solve their needs, that they're actually ready to hit that purchase button, the buy now button. So get into your thought process here. Right now, if you have a company that has a product, and start asking yourself the question, what do we need to show them? What does that wow moment look like? Are we really clear about what it is? Is it well defined for us? And once we know that, we now can start to look at the time to wow. How many steps does it take? How much time does it take them? And how much friction's involved for them? So I'd like to use an example here to show you how to remove those steps and remove friction. And this is one of my other portfolio companies, a company called Salsify. And I need to tell you a bit about what Salsify does, so bear with me for 2 seconds. So if you imagine you're an e-commerce shopper and you arrive at Amazon or B&H or something like that, I'm assuming a lot of people here like cameras like me, so hopefully this will resonate. One of the things that kind of makes you buy stuff are these cool videos and reviews where people talk about how they're using this camera and how good it is and how well it works in low light and stuff like that. So there's a ton of information there that you have to pull together if you're one of those retailers to be able to create that product page. And it's very hard for the brands. They're not used to doing this. That information's all over the show, and they have to pull it together. So Salsify helps them pull it together and shows them where it's missing information. But then the really cool thing that it does is it automatically reformats that information for completely different requirements that are needed by B&H, who have a totally different portal than Amazon does, than Adorama has, than Best Buy has, which is traditionally a huge problem for them, because if they want to add on a new retailer, it takes them forever to deal with the reformatting of that information. So that's what they do. Let's look at their original free trial experience. So you signed up, and then they sent you an email a little while later, and they did this because it took them a bit of time to set up a special account environment for your sandbox, so they couldn't just drop you in immediately in that situation. Then you have to come back and you open up the app. You've got to learn the user interface for this thing. Then you've got to go around your company and find where this content currently exists today, get it exported, and bring it into Salsify. And then to really see the value of it, you've got to sign up a new retailer. You've got to get some new sales that you weren't getting before and export to that retailer. So let's have a quick look. Here was the original sign-up form that they had. Tons of fields on this thing. And then you waited for the email, and a while later the email arrived, and then you got dropped into the product, and hey, this is kind of a complicated, rich product, and there's nothing you can do here because it's waiting for some products to get installed in this thing. So let's take a look at the first step of optimization. So what we did here was we got inside the buyer's head, and we've marked in red all the things that are high friction, high pain for the buyer to go through. And let's look at this first one, this wait for an email with an account. They realized they had to solve that problem. So they just had to create a much faster provisioning mechanism to instantaneously create that experience. So that was the first thing, get rid of that delay there. So let's go through the sign up very quickly now. And you'll see a single field, making it much less friction and much less concerns for the buyer. And also you see on here something pretty cool, which is they leveraged the brand names of a lot of their customers down at the bottom to make you feel safer about the fact this was actually a lot of important people are using this, so maybe I should as well. And here's a sort of customer reference thing to excite you about the idea that you could get some value out of this. So once they got through that, they then dropped you into the app immediately, but you're still stuck with this problem of not being able to know to do anything because you haven't got your product information in there. So let's go back to this here and have a look at this, this issue. The thing I want to highlight here is the friction here that's important is that there's other people needed to be involved to get this product information, and that's a problem. So the one thing that they can do there is put sample data in there. It's not going to be as good as, but it will help get them motivated enough to perhaps after they've played with sample data, see some of the benefits and then go through to the final stage of doing their own data there. So here's what the screen looked like after that. Explore with sample data or upload your own data. Now, the only issue with that is they dropped you into this complex product with all this data in it, but there was no clear path to get to wow. So the next thing they did was they added a guided navigation feature, which really makes sure that the way you get from the entry point into the product to wow is going to be very clear, and there's no risk of you accidentally getting lost in that process there. And they also added human help available if needed there. And those few changes there made a very big difference. So this is from the getting onto the page where you decide to do a free trial. Instead of 18% hitting the taking action thing, they got to 60%. That's 3x more with those few changes in there. But we still weren't done. So let's look at the next things that we did. So right now you can see that to really get the true wow, you have to get some new sales for this person who's using the product. And that's a big issue because to go and sign up a new retailer, that's a lot of negotiation and other people being involved in that process. So there was a cool thing that happened. Google introduced a new product they call Manufacturer Center, where brands could upload their product information to Google. Google, trying to prevent people from going to Amazon for their product searches and wants them to come to Google, created this thing. And so if you've uploaded your information, you now search on running shoes, you'll see that they've got all this guided navigation to find specific kinds of running shoes. So they will create new search results leading people to look at your brand. So that was pretty cool because now instead of going and signing up a brand new retailer, the person doing the trial could just sign up with Google, which they could do easily on their own, upload this information to Google, and bingo, they had a new channel that was creating new sales for them that would create a wow moment for them. So that instantaneously cut a lot of time and friction out of the process there. So we're still faced with one major issue in this, which is in order to make that work, you've got to find your content and bring it into the system. So there was a breakthrough here where these guys realized that actually their brand's content is already up on other retailers. And by going out there and scraping that content from all of these other retailers, they could actually do that import process just to a good enough extent to get some immediate functionality working. So that created a mini wow where they immediately see they have the content in there showing all these issues with it, and really eliminates the need to even do the sample data at all in the first place. So now, if we look at the whole finished process, sign up, immediately arrive in the product with your own data in it, and be able to immediately get some new business straight away by publishing up to Google, which you couldn't do without an awful lot of trouble, that's an exciting and pretty compelling process there. So we haven't got the final results yet to show exactly what the uplift was, but it is way higher than it obviously was before with this. So I want to just tackle one little thing on here. Notice that the sign-up is at the beginning of the process, and people hate signing up for things, giving out their email addresses. So one thing for you to think about here is in your trial, can you, instead of asking them for the sign-up, move the wow to the front and actually give them something of value before you ask them to give you their email address? That's another way that I've seen creating some additional conversion rates for you. Let me take another very painful process. A lot of you like to use sales development reps to do cold calling. It's a very powerful technique that's pretty scalable. The only problem with this is, can I ask any person in this room, will you raise your hand if you like getting a cold call from a salesperson? So I don't see a single hand raised. So why are we creating a painful sales process for our poor buyers? Bad thing to do, right? So what can you do to change that? Well, let's have a look at the friction and concerns here and think about the motivation. So we need to come up with a motivation to create the step there. So the redesign of the process here is simple. I have used educational events as a thing that you get your sales development reps to invite them to. Invite them to events where they can meet their peers, give them some data that they can look at that's of value to them, sometimes let them see their own data in a new way, but create something where you give them value straight out of the gate here, and then use that to build a relationship with them. Do not sell. Believe me, if I can give you the strongest piece of advice that I've learned in all my years here, selling is the worst way to sell. It's going to sort of sound shocking, but that's the problem with all of these sales situations here. It's a major turnoff to the customer. Think about why you didn't raise your hands when I was talking about cold calls and having salespeople approach you. So once you've got the relationship, what I've done in the past is try to build trust. And I did this typically by trying to become an expert around something that the customer cared about so that I could talk to them about something that would be helpful to them. And what happens when you do that is the customer will turn to you and they will say, do you know how I might think about solving this problem? And bingo, they just gave you permission to become a consultant to help them buy something. And that's how I like to sell. I find that to be incredibly fun and effective and generally far less friction than the way that we currently do it today. So this is one example here of a company that's using data that's available publicly on the web about their buyers. So before they even do an email, they go out and scrape the web and they try to figure out something. So you can see here, this is an SEO company called Conductor. I noticed that you've lost a significant amount of traffic, 4,400 visits over the past month. Somebody's going to care about that. Is this something that the team is aware of, or do you have any idea? You dropped off the first page of Google in 11 searches, and that's what created the problem there. But there are 916 different search opportunities where you can fix the issue. So this is immediately going to get the prospect's attention. It's their data in a relevant way that's probably new to them, and it's going to get them excited and interested in looking at things. So there's another thing to think about a little bit if you're going to do this time to wow thing, and that is, do you have different types of buyers? So I was an investor in a company called Tribe HR that had 3 modules. They had an HR information system, an applicant tracking system, and a performance management system. So one thing they had to do was check to see which module, which wow experience would be appropriate for the specific visitor that came to the website. So that's something to think about a little bit if you're going to try this exercise for yourselves. I've got another fun example for you of a different tool that you can use to eliminate friction. So anybody in the audience familiar with a company called Clearbit? Several of you are. It's a great company. We're not investors in them, but I really like what they do. They basically take new leads where you might have a very small amount of information, like just the email address, and they'll enrich it with a ton of additional fields, which company, what position, etc., for you. Their problem, though, was their buyer does not want to buy their product unless you solve these 2 issues. The top issue for them was lots of people have made the same claim that they could do what Clearbit does in the past, but not delivered. They had just poor data that wasn't good enough, and as a result, they're skeptical about Clearbit. And then the other thing they have to prove is that if you've got 100,000 records in Salesforce and Clearbit only has 1% coverage of it, it's far less valuable to you than if they've got 25% coverage of it. So they need to know what kind of coverage you have. And this is an issue because the connection to Salesforce had to go through the IT department to be able to see the entire database, to be able to get at this information for them. And that is a big problem. The moment you've got to go and get this other group involved, lots of friction, very, very few people would actually get the permission to do this just for a free trial. So the solution here was to use a Chrome browser extension that's pretty low friction to get somebody to install that. And then that is able to kind of add on to the web page at the bottom just by rewriting the HTML in Salesforce. So you get a complete feeling for what it's like to have this product installed without actually installing it. And you get to have a look at the value that they're providing on any contact that you want to use as an example to get a sense of it. And then they could run a report and actually take it's like 1,000 people sample and give you a report to say what coverage they had there. So that's just kind of a classic example of, as you think more about the friction for your buyer, there are these cool techniques. And I wish I had more time because I've got like 4 or 5 more cool examples to show you where other companies have done different things with different tools here. But I don't have the time, so I'm going to have to keep moving here. So one thing you've seen me focus on that I think is really important is try to eliminate any step which requires the buyer to go and consult with a different person, another individual in their organization, because that will lead to delays. So once you do this, what you find is you fix one part of your funnel and the problem jumps to another area. I think of this as like funnel whack-a-mole. And so you need to keep working on this. And what I found is that most people don't have the right process in place to do this. And one of the biggest issues they have is they don't have a growth team that's been fully assembled. They have maybe the marketing department that's working on bits of this and the sales department working on their bits of it. But in my view, that siloed thinking will not solve these problems. And you have to create a different growth team, and you'll notice that I've really highlighted the product team in there as being crucial players because the product is now becoming your salesperson. And I recommend having a regular meeting of this group, and the way to get this meeting fired up is to use a diagram of the funnel. So here's a funny thing. I do this for fun. I walk into companies and I ask them to draw their funnel. And they're all sure that they know exactly what it is, but within 2 minutes of starting and drawing it up on the board, it's obvious that there's a whole bunch of differing views, and this thing isn't that well defined. And then something fascinating happens as it gets defined. They come up with creative solutions. I don't even do anything. I'm just getting them to do this diagram. So it's an amazing tool for triggering creativity. And recognize that when you're doing something like a website or a free trial, you're going to need to get to the micro stages in the funnel as well. So draw those out as a separate funnel of little micro steps there like we did for Salsify. So the last thing quickly to talk about is metrics. If you're going to have this growth meeting, you have to have metrics. Otherwise, if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. And this funny thing about funnels is that they're really cool because they actually are governed by 2 primary variables. Only 2. That's kind of lovely when life is that simple. The variables is top of the funnel flow multiplied by conversion rate. There are others, but these are the 2 primary ones. So if we're going to be setting up our metrics, we need to track how many visitors are coming to the website, how many of those got into trials, how many of those are going into closed deals, and what's our conversion rate. And I recommend doing that with a time series graph so you can see if it's improving over time. Let me warn you that in order to produce this graph, it's not simple because you have to do cohort analysis. You've got to look at the January group of leads that came in and track them through several months to find out how many they actually flowed through. You can't just look at a snapshot of this here. So last thought for you here, just before I summarize and wrap up. There is a way of thinking about things that I really like, which is treat your customer like a bank account. You have to put money make a deposit before you try to make a withdrawal. And I think if you do that, you'll find that things really become dramatically easier and far simpler to get this building of a relationship and building of trust. And then the selling will happen in this really comfortable way where they're asking you for their advice on how to solve their problems there. So hopefully that was useful to you. Hyper-tactical compared to our previous speaker. But if it is of interest, the slides are up and available for repurposing. But thank you so much for your time and attention.
David, great presentation. Appreciate it. I actually lead a lot of our sales team, which is people right now more than product. Leading the sales team. I just wanted to know what you thought about balancing customer service with sales, because a lot of the times whenever we actually get the customer to convert is whenever they have a question about the product or want to know more. Do you have any recommendations on balancing that between?
Yes, I do. And I think it's a great question. And if you remember this slide here, where I talked about the team that you want to use, you'll notice that I put the customer success group in there. Because if we're in the recurring revenue business these days, which most companies are, it's super important that you don't just create a sale that doesn't stick around. So I think there are a couple of things that I've seen work very well there, which is one of them is a clawback on sales commissions if they are bringing in customers that churn. But ultimately, I think you really need your salespeople to get educated about the profile of a customer that is the correct profile that's going to get the value. And then secondly, making sure that they're not overselling the value. And that comes down to an onboarding emphasis, which I think a lot of people don't put enough time into. When you've hired this incredibly expensive resource, a salesperson, I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity here for startups to improve how well they do that onboarding to teach these people how to do this job better. So that would be what I'd recommend.
And by onboarding, you mean when somebody signs up, walking them through the
Yes.
product.
When a new salesperson joins your organization, how do you take them through the 2 weeks initial training or 3 weeks initial training to bring them fully up to speed on your competition, your product, your customers, the business that the customers are in, what they care about, that full scope of how to sell, how to handle competitive inquiries and things like that.
Understood. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the great question.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. So I have a question. You talked about in the beginning how if you have an enterprise product that has a big ticket item that for a small company, it could be a strategic a way to get into companies by going with another company. So I have an opportunity to take on a partner who wants to license our software and resell it. So I have two questions for you. The first is, generally speaking, what do you think about enterprise license models today? Are they still relevant considering the world of SaaS? And then secondly, if you were to make a license agreement with a partner who's going to resell this product, how would you structure it?
Great question. Thank you very much. So I do have a strong thought on this. I believe if you're going to tackle a partner like that, I think you have to have two layers of your product. The layer that you license to them has to be something that you have a second upsell component that you don't license to them, that once you've gained access to their customer base, you have a way to go back and you use that partnership to get them to put your name and brand in front of those buyers so that you have a chance to go back to them and upsell them on something and get a direct relationship with their customers. Otherwise, you run the risk of you've just given away something of high value to them, you've got no reason to ever go back to those customers, and you lost the potential for the high margin and the relationship with the customer, which ultimately creates the value for your company. So, super short answer, lots more thoughts on the subject, but hopefully helpful.
Thank you.
Jackie, thank you very much indeed.
Hey, everybody, let's take a moment to thank Squarespace, the amazing, amazing service where I build all the beautiful websites that you visit. Founder.university, Angel.university, Launch Festival, LaunchFestivalSydney.com. We use Squarespace because we can make beautiful websites quickly, easily, and affordably. Yes, you can turn on your cool idea into a new website. You can showcase your work. You can blog or publish content. You can sell products and services of all kinds. You can do it all with Squarespace. You can promote your physical or real-world business like I do, my events. Or you can announce your upcoming events or special projects. There are tons of beautiful templates, and they're created by world-class designers. They have powerful e-commerce functionality now, and you can sell anything you want online. You can customize the look and feel. You know that with just a couple of clicks. And it's optimized for mobile right out of the box. If you open it on your iPad, you open it up on your Samsung Galaxy, you open it up on your Pixel XL, your Pixel, your iPhone X, whatever you open it up on, it's going to look beautiful. And you can buy domains and choose from over 200 extensions. There are a lot of great extensions out there. I'm using .university, for example. They have great analytics that will help you grow in real time, built-in search engine optimization, which is critical, free and secure hosting, as well as 24/7 award-winning customer support. Nope, you're not going to be left on the hook if you have problems. You just call them right up, and they will help you. Okay, so this is the important part. It's your call to action. Check out squarespace.com and get a free trial. When you're ready to purchase, just use the offer code TWIST, T-W-I-S-T, and you can save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Make it yourself. Easily create a website by yourself. That's what you need to know. And you can make it stand out with these beautiful, beautiful templates that they provide. Go ahead and visit squarespace.com, and remember to use the offer code TWIST to get that 10% off your first purchase. Okay, let's get back to this amazing episode. Now, next up is Maren Kate Donovan. She was the founder of Zirtual, which was one of my investments, and she's going to talk about failure, and in a very candid way. So I think this is a super important discussion. Please welcome Maren. Big round of applause. All right. Very brave. Up top. Go get him.
Thank you. So, unlike what you've been hearing about a lot in the last 2 days, I'm going to be talking about what not to do and failure versus what to do and success. So as you leave here, you'll leave feeling a lot better about your own startups, and potentially you'll learn something that can help you avoid pitfalls in the future. But first, to give you some background, I'll tell you how my first startup started. So my startup journey began the typical way, floating down a river in Reno, Nevada, rocking a Budweiser bandana. I know you're probably sick of the typical female founder from Reno, leaves a lofty career bartending and comes to San Francisco story, but that's my game. So to be fair, I'd started several little businesses since I was 19 in college in Reno, and they went from reselling jewelry to building social media strategies for brands to scribbling startup ideas on napkins as I mitigated a few bar fights at night, which was my night job. And even though I had great friends, good boyfriend, 2 adorable cats, I felt like something was missing. So I decided to leave a city known for quickie divorces for a land full of fog and people that think it's okay to wear startup hoodies on first dates. Luckily, after a few tries, got into Founders Institute, and the business that graduated from there was called Zirtual. It was a little idea I'd hacked away at for a few months, and it was posing virtual executive assistants with entrepreneurs to help them save time so they could focus on business and personal things that matter. I brought on my 2 co-founders, Colin and Eric, and one of the biggest blessings in this whole experience was my relationship with my co-founders. It's something that I think is invaluable. Startups are tough enough as they are, but having some people that you trust and like to share the journey is essential. And Colin and Eric and I were super close. We actually spent the first 6 months in that 100-square-foot studio in the Tenderloin. We sacrificed our personal lives and privacy to get our bootstrap baby off the ground. So after that photo was taken, Zirtual went through a series of things. We grew to an employee base of 450 people at one point, moving from independent contractors to employees. We raised a little over $5 million in funding, and we grew to an $11 million run rate. Then, sadly, obviously, we had to lay everyone off overnight and sell the brand in a fire sale. So what I want to do today is talk to you about the lessons learned in hopes that this helps some of you with scaling in the future, and especially the pitfalls and things to avoid and just be aware of that are not as talked about. So the wisest startup stage of them all, Notorious B.I.G., he had it right. One thing I want to start with is that capital is a means to an end and not the end itself. I think that this is incredibly important, especially in this time. We live in an era where people seem to equate success with what money is raised, when that's mile marker 1 in a multi-mile race. Raising money is obviously great if you know what you're going to do with it, if you have a plan, and if you're raising it for the right reasons. Make sure that you need it to grow your business and you don't just want it as validation. That was a lesson I learned coming from Nevada to San Francisco, especially as a first-time venture-backed entrepreneur. It was very easy to get caught up in the idea of, oh, we should be raising money because that's what everyone is supposed to do. And I even hear now when I'm at dinners with entrepreneurs, they talk about, oh yeah, this company's doing well because they raised this much money, versus this company is doing well because of the larger vision, and not understanding that capital is just a part of the process. It is not the end goal. Obviously, raising money also leads to having investors. These are people that you are stuck with, for better or worse, for 5 to 10 years. Just like your investors should do diligence on you, you should be doing significant diligence on your investors. Talk to entrepreneurs that they have backed, that have failed, ones that have gone through hard times, and obviously the ones that have succeeded. Some of the best investors that we brought on at Zirtual, like Jason, are still advocates today. Take time to find investors like that and pass every time on easy or quick money that comes from the wrong people. So, unless you're in finance, hire finance. This is absolutely the biggest takeaway, my biggest regret. Once you raise that capital, you need someone on your team who is strong in the financial field. It could be an active advisor, it could be a founder, it could be an early team member. This was the single biggest point of failure on my end. I knew how to balance a checkbook, so I mistakenly thought that because that was the case, I could handle it until we needed a CFO. So there's also a saying that sales cures all. And this is true if you have your unit economics locked down. You can sell like crazy, and Zirtual did. Towards the end, we were almost $1 million a month MRR. But since we made the change from independent contractors to employees, we didn't properly take into account our unit economics, and thus we literally were growing broke. So you always have another move if there's cash in the bank. Cash is king, and it sounds cheesy, but it's completely true. And then lastly, on this note of finance, I would say if you hire an outsourced financial firm, be sure to set up checks and balances with your team and your board. Get a second and third opinion before choosing that firm. There are some great ones out there, and there are some truly shit ones. And at the end of the day, your finances are your responsibility, so that's never an excuse. So no matter what you sell, your startup's biggest strengths are its people. And figuring out hiring ethos early on, super important. So I've hired over 500 people in the last 10 years and interviewed thousands more. There's 3 lessons I've gleaned from this experience that I want to share from hiring lots of great people and a few not so good ones. So example 1 is I hired an executive from a well-known startup. He was a friend of an advisor, and the advisor said he was great. So he talked a good game, very buttoned up, and within 4 weeks, he had quit via text message. I could have saved a ton of energy, time, and money if instead of just kind of getting infatuated and hiring the person on, I had have done due diligence and back channel reference checks. So the biggest thing I always recommend is to do back channel references. When a candidate gives you their references, you might as well just throw them away because no one's giving you references of someone that's going to say bad things about them. Instead, take 30, 60 minutes, take a few hours, have one of your interns do this, and find 7 people that are in the last 10 years of their employment. 3 people who they worked for, 2 people who they worked with, and 2 people who reported to them. Outside of the finance thing, if you take one thing away from this, it should be this. So example 2 is hire, promote, and fire based on your core values. Everyone says this, few people actually make it a practice. The more unique your core values are, the better. My new company, we have a kind of bipolar culture of we're very professional when we deal with our clients, but internally we're goofy and irreverent. We let that ooze out in job descriptions, and it scares away 90% of the people, but the 10% who see that and are like, that's the kind of weird that I'm into, actually are great. And it's a much easier way to fill the funnel and then filter it and attract people that will really last for the long run. Example 3, raw talent with drive outweighs experience most of the time. Some of the best people I've ever hired have been junior and have grown into roles because they were hungry, driven, and they bought into the vision. So in your companies, in your portfolio companies, if you're investors, try to empower and attract raw talent. Your initial strengths can become your biggest weakness. Example with the financing. I had a few businesses before. I'd always manage the book, so to speak. What you're good at means you're actually probably okay at it. So you will actually not hire someone to fill that gap, and instead you'll inadequately try to do it yourself. So to help guard against this, it's great to surround yourself with people who you trust, but who will challenge you regularly. Ray Dalio's Bridgewater is known for a very transparent culture that is always the most junior person can challenge him, and they have these big things. He had a book out recently called Principles that details how to do that, and I think it's amazing. As first-time founders, we're often afraid to be challenged because we don't want to be proven wrong. We think that, that makes us a bad founder. But in reality, it's the best thing that can happen because each time someone points out your weakness, you can begin solving for it. So a question that I think is underlooked in the startup world is, are you happy? Asking yourself why. First off, why are you doing what you're doing? This can be used in all aspects of life, but since we're talking about scaling businesses, I'll focus on the business example. Why do you want to hit X million in revenue? Is it to reach a Y valuation? Is it to raise more money? Why are you going after those specific metrics? Are they vanity metrics, or are they metrics that actually feed into the big term vision? I think asking why and really delving into your true motivations is something that we tend to not do enough at early stages in our startup. It's great to be brutally honest. Once someone told me, it was a weird piece of advice, but it's always stuck, that you can lie to yourself or you can lie to everyone else, but never ever lie to yourself. And you should always be honest with your real motivations. So I think taking a long weekend thinking this one over, this book, Start With Why, is a great way to approach this when it comes to your companies. So this is an interesting one. I've talked about this a few times. I don't think I've ever seen this in a tech startup conference. Get therapy now. What drives us to entrepreneurship is a confluence of experience, personality traits, obviously our background growing up. Those aren't always healthy. When Zirtual imploded, I had been seeing a therapist for about a year and had recently been prescribed medication for a combination of anxiety and obsessive compulsive that I'd had since I was a kid. And I just always assumed I was crazy and everyone else was normal. And I didn't realize until very late in my startup's game that there were some things I could have done to help myself balance those pressures. I thank God for my therapist during my darkest times. I shudder to imagine what it would have been like going through that without her and the normalizing effects of medication. We have allergies to openly speaking about mental illness, but 1 in 5 Americans have something that has to do with it, but are undiagnosed. So perhaps you're thinking, hey, crazy, that might have worked for you, but I'm as mentally fit as a fiddle. First, I would say, don't call me crazy. That's rude. Second, starting and scaling a company is incredibly stressful, and stress exacerbates dormant issues we don't even know we have. So better be safe than sorry. There are a variety of excellent in-person therapists, and there's also great online and text-based, call-based services startups, actually, for the uber busy and those that are shy. Being your best, happiest self gives your company a competitive edge, and you should take each of those you can get. The importance of rest. I'm all about leverage. Zirtual was started around the idea of 80-20, and that's Pareto's law, which is 80% of the outcome comes from 20% of the input, roughly. This is why I don't believe in working crazy hours anymore. Before, I used to think that's what successful people did, so I would burn myself out, work 12 hours, but not really be getting a ton done. Now I work very hard, but in 30-minute spurts for no more than 90 minutes, which seems to be your mind's upper limit for super focus. I take breaks, I go on walks, I read, I get foot massages. For me, that like spawns the creativity, and the downtime allows subtle connections to be made in your mind. A great book on the topic is called Rest. Talks about the science behind it and how the most creative and successful people throughout history have actually had a lot of free time on their hands. Every successful entrepreneur I've met has also said roughly the same thing around enjoying the journey. The days that you're struggling, you're going to actually miss them when you get bigger. So it sounds weird, but it's true. Take photos, document it, and most importantly, have a little bit of fun. Not only does this make your startup life more enjoyable, but playing and regularly detaching from your work makes you better when you're actually on. A great book on this is called Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try. After reading this, I actually instituted a digital detox and play day. Every Saturday, I turn off my computer, leave it at home, put my phone into airplane mode, and then just go explore, find things to enjoy my surroundings, play, and it's quickly become the highlight of my week. And I've also noticed huge advances in my productivity and happiness in the weeks to follow that I'm working. So lastly, when we're thinking about scaling startups, I think it's important to contemplate both success and failure. That's actually the giant Teddy section of Costco. It's where I like to go for all my contemplation. It's pretty epic. Cultivating skills that will last you a lifetime. Obviously, as we're building businesses, we're planning on and hoping for massive success. Hopefully, you're writing your goals down every day. It seems to have almost a magical quality when it comes to focusing and manifesting what you desire. Some people think that it's just your mind focusing on certain opportunities. Other people think it's more metaphysical than that. There's a really interesting blog post by the creator of Dilbert. You can find it by Googling Scott Adams and affirmations. It sounds mamby-pamby, but it's really cool. I would definitely check it out. But as you're thinking about success and how you're going to succeed, it's also important to contemplate failure, to think what happens if it doesn't work. Are you scaling your startup? While you're scaling your startup, be sure you're cultivating skills that will last you a lifetime and potentially last you after this startup, or if you're in a different role down the line at this startup. So what are you the best at? What do you enjoy the most? What skills would be the most relevant as you go on in the future? And ideally, you can be a double or triple threat. This means you're more than 80%, good at 2 to 3 things. And as you scale your startup, try to assess your skills and see where your unique strengths can overlap and make you invaluable in a unique way. So if you start it, you end it. This is something that I don't think, especially in the early days, many of us think a lot about. At the end of the day, you start it, you end it. It took years to unwind the messy way Zirtual closed and then sold. I have to take responsibility for 400 people that lost their jobs, investors that lost money, and clients that lost support. Employing people and starting a company is a serious responsibility. It's something that we don't talk about when we talk about startups and super growth and launching companies and all the exciting parts. We forget that there's actually people and real feelings and emotions on the other side of that. The consequences of failing at a startup are a lot harsher than just personal embarrassment. You can lose friendships, professional relationships, and most importantly, you can hurt real people that either rely on your service or are some way linked in. I think that it shouldn't discourage anyone from starting, but it should be something that we talk about more and that we think about when we're thinking about starting up and scaling our businesses, so we're balancing both sides. Hopefully some of these lessons have helped you when you're thinking about your startup and scaling and avoiding any pitfalls, and that you take care of your emotional and mental self as you put your dent in the universe. Thank you, and if you have any questions, I'm easy to reach.
That was great, by the way. Good job.
Thank you.
Very brave. When you look back on it, I've always thought like a lot of these, we call them mental illnesses, are like superpowers. Like some of my best friends have ADHD or are on the spectrum, and it actually is kind of their superpower. It was the OCD that you had that wasn't diagnosed. When you look at it, is that part of the reason you were able to make that business work so well? Because there were so many moving parts, and it took an obsessiveness to make it work. I kind of always felt like you were an obsessive person, but in a good way.
Yeah.
How do you look at that now that you have that diagnosis?
I think it's absolutely a superpower, totally. Yeah. You're right. I know a lot of people that have different types of spectrum or ADD, and they are so good because of that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think you also have to balance the emotional side of it. Because once you understand that you have that superpower, if you can harness it and then balance out some of the negative impacts, I think that's when it actually becomes a superpower.
When you know
when you know what it is and you can manage it.
Yeah, it's sort of like there was at some point in the comic books, the Incredible Hulk became like Bruce Banner, and he was Bruce Banner at the same time as being the Hulk, as opposed to just smashing things.
Exactly.
He could balance it. So, any questions or thoughts? It was interesting. Also, Loic had a conversation because he was suffering from a lot of burnout, and he was talking about balance and meditation. Do you meditate? Was that part of your?
I did start.
Yeah.
I started actually Calm.
You started Calm.com. Absolutely.
Yeah, Calm helped me out. I like that a lot.
And now, do you think you're ready to do another company?
So I am. I'm starting small, though. I'm starting with the way I did before, bootstrapped.
Yep.
And I'm going to kind of try the profitable route for a while and then see. I wouldn't raise money again unless, like I said, I was like, you drop $1 in and I have an 80% feeling that at the bottom it comes out to 10.
Right.
I think coming your second time, you have that level of maturity, which is really good.
Yeah, and bootstrapping it can be done.
For sure.
Yeah. All right, well, I want to invest now because I feel like you've learned so much, and we were on this great journey together with Zirtual, and it feels like all of those lessons will find their way into this next
Yes,
startup.
for sure.
So let's give a big round of applause to Maren. Well done.